Well, what do you know? It is April 23rd, openly secular day, a day to talk about and answer questions about secular life. So now that my classes are done for the day, I thought, I'll do a video. I came up with 4 questions. 1, why do people use a particular label, secular? 2, if I know about Jesus, why identify as a secular instead of a Christian? 3, why am I secular? And 4, what is living a secular life like? Well, start off. Why do people use the label secular in particular? Why not say you're an atheist or something like that? There's a bunch of factors that go into it, but the largest one probably is that there's a lot of negative stereotypes that are associated with the word atheist. I mean, recently Ken Ham was saying that the motto of the atheist is God doesn't exist and we hate him. Or think of God's not dead. The idea that atheists are people who deep down inside believe in God but hate him. So by using the word secular, it gets the point across that people don't believe in a theistic religion. It doesn't have the connotation that someone hates a particular god, whether that's Allah or Yahweh or Krishna. That's probably the biggest reason why. Number 2, you clearly know a lot about the Bible, Josiah, and you talk a lot about Jesus, so why aren't you a Christian? Good question. Interestingly, in America, the majority of atheists, seculars, have previously been Christians, so I'm sort of the norm here. Most seculars are greatly familiar with Christ, the Bible, and at least a smattering of apologetics and theology. So, it's actually against the norm to meet a secular person who doesn't know something about Jesus and the Bible, etc. I mean, for me personally, if you cease believing fervently in the Christian faith, that doesn't mean you've suddenly abandoned your intimate familiarity with the Bible or with Christian culture. So, it's not actually as much of a surprise as you think. Number 3, why are you secular? Well, there's a lot of things that play into that, but more or less it ended up being that people I ran into and conversed with about Jesus, mostly in my attempts to speak to them the gospel, I got asked questions that were hard questions that I couldn't answer, and I ended up taking a long trip to Francis Schaeffer's study center, L'Abri in Switzerland. It's just a little cluster of buildings in the middle of the Swiss mountains, nearby a town of like 200 people. And staying there for a couple of months to fellowship with other Christians and really just hash out some of the questions that I had. And what I found in attempting to answer these questions is that rather than dispelling, the questions confirmed themselves. So, my time at L'Abri was an exercise in how astonishingly fast presuppositions can fall under the weight of scrutiny. When I read things to confirm my faith, like evidence that commands verdicts, case for Christ, reason for God, mere Christianity, all of the classic apologetics work that tries to answer questions about the Christian faith. I put them head to head with critical books, such as On the Historicity of Jesus, or The Case Against the Case for Christ. And putting them head to head, there really was no contest. I realized that in evangelicalism, I'd never been called to answer truly skeptical questions about God. The sort of watered-down questions that, these apologetics book dealt with are not the hard questions that I'd been asked. It was like they were playing t-ball and weren't really engaging with some of the more questions that can be posed to the Christian faith. As an example, C.S. Lewis very famous for his liar, lunatic, Lord trilemma. If Jesus wasn't a liar, and if he wasn't a lunatic, he must be the Lord, who he says he was. But really, that's an avoidance of the question, because for the past couple hundred years, no one's been insisting that Jesus is a liar. No one's been insisting that he's a lunatic. But most scholars who look at the history surrounding first century Palestine have not come to the conclusion that he is Lord. Rather, thinking of stuff perhaps you might find in On the Historicity of Jesus or any other critical works, they're looking at the evidence and coming up with the idea that Jesus in the Gospels is both a product of historicity and of legendary development. The argument isn't that Jesus is a liar or a lunatic, but rather that he's legend. And C.S. Lewis's famous argument doesn't deal with the greatest question of who Jesus is. It avoids that question. Evidence that demands a verdict pointed to a lot of the places where the Bible is historically correct. But it doesn't tackle the parts where the Bible isn't historically correct. The Exodus would be a good example. It just ignores it. When talking about Christ, the case for Christ, people want to write volumes about the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. But no one wants to talk about the ones that he didn't fulfill. And if you ever get in a conversation with a more orthodox Jew, they will bring those to your attention quite readily. So my reading and study confirmed not the truth of Scripture, but rather its flawed humanity, just like every other religious book in existence. And from that, I was faced with the choice either to become a liberal believer and interpret like lots of the Bible metaphorically, or do I stop playing games and come to grips with a new non-theistic philosophy? I had to choose the latter because nothing in me can subscribe to some wishy-washy metaphorical religion. I know some people can do it. I can't. I cannot. It is impossible for me to believe that. What happens then? Or what is it like to live a secular life? So question number 4, I guess. Question number 4. What is it like to live a secular life? What happens then after you find yourself unable to continue in the faith that you've always lived in? That will be different from person to person, but a general feeling from particularly Christians who have studied and then left the faith is a very positive one, a real uplift for their life. And it's not altogether different from the life that an evangelical Christian lives. If you're like most evangelical Christians, you'll be familiar with getting answers, whether that's answers to something that's on your heart or an answer to prayer. Maybe used to events that just are so crazy, they can't be a coincidence, so you wonder, hey, is God behind this? Chance meetings with people who just touch your life and you're able to touch theirs. Encouragement, nourishment, grace, forgiveness when you're sad, alone, disheartened. I guess I experienced that too. It didn't really change when I found myself unable to believe in Jesus Christ as Lord. It kept happening. You still have these crazy meetings with people. You still have these words that people speak to you that are exactly what you need to hear in the moment. When you're alone or you're sad, I still get grace and forgiveness and nourishment and ministry. It just doesn't happen in response to prayer anymore. It just happens. And it's amazing. I was afraid I was going to be in for a dry life. I wasn't. I guess it helps put it in perspective is that, when I was in church, we would often say that God primarily uses people to minister and administer his kingdom and his grace. The same is true now. I'm ministered and touched by people all the time. I don't know, it's not as different as you'd think. Really not a whole lot changed. And how it is different for me in the positive sense, because it is being secular is a very positive thing for me, is that you really get to experience all the mystery and beauty that I love from my former love of Jesus but without the toxic attachments which previously weighed me down. Some examples. For a really long time, as a Christian, I felt that the sexes were equal, but I had to deny that in favor of a biblical woman's place. A part of me, when I met loving homosexual families, I had to deny that their relationship was a wonderful thing, which it felt like it was, but I had to force myself to believe that actually they don't love each other. They are actually lusting wickedly for each other's bodies, as Romans says, turned over to their lust. That it's not a beautiful thing, it's not a family, no, it's wicked and sinful and they're going to burn for it, it's not love. I had to force myself to believe that. I had to, in my interactions with people, when they would describe, people of other faiths, when they would describe their encounters with the divine that had changed their lives, how they'd been delivered from addiction by believing in Allah, or how experience outside of Christianity had changed their lives, I had to just be like, no, I don't believe it, I don't believe you, I cannot accept your witness because Jesus is the only way. I had to shut it down. I had to shut people out sometimes. Sorry, the video just walked out for some reason. Anyway, I had to grapple with the weight of hell. There are many good people in this world, but I had to make myself believe that God didn't care about their goodness or the quality of life, but had to believe that they were going to burn. I had to believe that even though the Holocaust ovens have been shut down for decades, the Jews who died in them are still burning. This time in hellfire, because, they're Jews after all, who reject Jesus as Messiah, and the only people who go to heaven are people who accept Jesus. And all these burdens, you don't think they weigh in your mind, they're just in the back of your mind, but when you stop believing, it's like... And that's just it. Now I don't carry that weight. I don't have to do that. I can stop forcing gays and women and non-believers and people of other faiths into little boxes and making them fit my dogma. I get the joy of experiencing people, of loving people for who they are, not from who my former faith demanded that they become so that my God would accept them. The reading I did in becoming a secular, it initially felt very threatening, and I was afraid that it would break down my life, that it would leave me without purpose. But instead I find, much to my overjoyed surprise, that the truth indeed sets you free, and that I have life, and I have it more abundantly. So there you go. Openly Secular Day 2015. 4 questions answered. 4 things you didn't know, but now you do. I hope you had a good day.